I remember the sound before I felt the pain, the crack of a boot striking flesh, the dull thud of my body collapsing against the kitchen floor, the air leaving my lungs in a single, useless gasp. The world went white, then red, then nothing but ringing in my ears and the copper taste of blood. When I opened my eyes, the light above me was sterile cold and too bright to belong anywhere human. The hum of machines surrounded me. A monitor beeped an uneven rhythm beside my bed, and through the blur of morphine haze, I heard someone whisper, "She's lucky to be alive." My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 30 years old, and 2 nights ago, my stepfather kicked me until I stopped moving, while my mother watched and smiled. The words don't make sense even now, lying here beneath fluorescent lights that buzz like angry bees. My ribs ache with each shallow breath. My skin is a map of bruises, deep purple, bleeding into yellow. The nurse checking my IV flinches when she meets my eyes as though my existence is something she can't quite process. She murmurs, "You need to rest," but her tone carries pity. Disbelief, maybe anger. I can't tell. A detective stands in the corner near the door. His notepad hangs loosely at his side. He looks uncomfortable, like he's intruding on something sacred. The chart at the foot of my bed reads multiple fractured ribs, concussion, possible internal bleeding. The doctor's voice still echoes from when I first woke up. She's stable for now, but she might not have made it through the night. Through the fog of medication, flashes return like shards of glass. Ray Collins, my mother's husband, 58 barrel-chested whiskey veins always pulsing under his skin, towering over me with that sneer of disgust he's perfected, the smell of beer and sweat, his words slurred but sharp. "You think you're better than us, huh? Too good for this family." Then the sound his boot connecting with my ribs again. The pain was pure white noise, blinding. And then there was her, my mother Evelyn, standing in the doorway in her nightgown, hands folded calmly, eyes dry, mouth curved in a small, almost satisfied smile. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't move. When Ray paused to catch his breath, she said quietly, "Don't stop because of me." Those 5 words cut deeper than any blow. I saw her watching me crumble, and I understood in that instant that she had chosen him over me long ago. The doctor's voice brings me back. "Do you remember what happened?" he asks gently, but the room spins and my throat tightens. What can I say? That my mother let him do it, that she seemed proud of it. My voice trembles. I fell. I whisper. He studies my face a long time before nodding, though we both know it's a lie. When he leaves, I stare at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the paint, with my eyes counting the seconds between each beep of the heart monitor. The silence feels heavy, as though the air itself disapproves of me. My left arm burns where the IV digs into bruised skin. Every inhale feels like a punishment, every exhale a confession. I should be dead. Maybe that's what they wanted. Outside the glass partition, I glimpse my mother in the waiting area. Her hair is neatly combed, makeup flawless, posture perfect. She looks like she's attending a PTA meeting, not sitting outside her daughter's hospital room after a beating. When a nurse offers her coffee, she smiles graciously, the same smile she wore while I bled on her kitchen tiles. My memory slips again. I see the kitchen, the faded wallpaper, the cracked linoleum floor, the clock ticking above the sink like a countdown. Ray yelling about the money I'd earned from my job, demanding I hand it over. "It's family money," he'd said, his breath hot and sour. "Everything that comes into this house belongs to me." I'd told him no. One word and the air changed. His eyes went flat and he lunged. I remember my body hitting the floor, the world narrowing to sound and color. His boot slammed into my side once, twice again. My mother's voice floated somewhere behind him. "She has to learn respect." The nurse interrupts the memory when she changes the IV bag, but her hand lingers on my arm. "Someone will talk to you soon," she says softly. I nod, though I don't know if I want to talk to anyone. I'm still in the moment between life and death, between disbelief and rage. The detective steps closer now. "Lauren," he says quietly, "we'll need your statement when you're ready." His tone isn't cold. It's cautious, as though he's learned that too much sympathy can make a victim shut down. I meet his eyes and ask the only question that matters. Is he here? He shakes his head. He's been detained. Your mother is with him. The words twist something deep in my chest. Of course she is. Of course she would stand beside him even now. My vision blurs again and I taste salt on my lips. The monitor beeps faster. The nurse rushes to adjust the oxygen tube. I want to tell her it's not the pain, it's the betrayal that's killing me. The doctor returns briefly murmuring to the nurse. She's stable. Let her rest. He doesn't look at me when he says it, but I hear the subtext she's alive for now. I close my eyes and the memory loops again. The flash of his boot, the smile on her face, the word that has haunted me my whole life echoing from both of them. Ungrateful. That's what they called me when I earned too much, when I spoke too loud when I wanted to leave. Ungrateful child, my mother whispered last, as if the title justified everything. The beeping steadies. My chest rises, falls, fights. I realize I survived. Against both of them, against their cruelty. I am still here. And for the first time, lying beneath the antiseptic glare of a hospital ceiling, I feel something unfamiliar crawl at my throat. Not fear, not shame, but a beginning. A thought as small and dangerous as a spark. This time, I will not stay silent. Before the bruises and the blood, before the hospital lights, there was the quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peace, but pressure. Thick humming, waiting to break. Our house on Maplewood Street looked normal from the outside, white siding, blue shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Neighbors waved when they drove by. They never saw what waited behind the front door once it closed. When Ray Collins moved in, I was 15. My mother said he was the man who would save us. She said it with a voice that shook like she didn't believe it herself. He was tall, built like the men who bragged about high school football trophies they'd never outgrown his handshake too tight, his eyes the color of cold ash. He sold insurance but drank like he was still mourning something his first wife maybe, or just his own pride. He called my mother darlin', and for the first few months, she glowed like she'd found a son. I wanted to believe it too. That illusion ended one evening when I came home from work at the diner. He was sitting in my chair at the kitchen table flipping through my notebook, my poems. He read one aloud, mocking the rhymes that tremble in my handwriting. "You think you're some kind of writer?" he sneered. "Ain't nobody pays for words, sweetheart." My mother laughed a soft, nervous sound, but she didn't take the notebook from him. That was the first time I felt the air shift, the first crack in the fragile glass of who I thought she was. Over the years, that silence became her armor. Whenever he shouted, she froze. Whenever he drank, she smiled wider. If I said anything, she'd whisper, "Don't provoke him, Lauren. You know how he gets." And when he hit me the first time, just a backhand across the mouth for talking back, she didn't look away, but she didn't move either. That was her version of love endurance disguised as peace. He built rules like fences. No locked doors, no late nights, no money of my own. He said I owed him for everything food roof life. When I turned 17, I got a scholarship offer from the state university. He laughed when he read the letter. "You don't need college," he said. "You need to learn obedience." My mother stood beside him, her hands clasped, eyes lowered. I asked her, "Don't you want me to have a future?" She said, "Your future is here. Be grateful." That word, grateful. It was his weapon, and she sharpened it for him. Every meal began with a lecture about how lucky I was. Every mistake became proof that I didn't deserve kindness. "You're too emotional," she'd say. "He's trying to make you strong." But strength built on fear is just submission in a prettier dress. When I was 19, he started drinking earlier in the day. The smell of bourbon lingered in the curtains. He'd wait for my mother to leave for work, then corner me in the kitchen to rant about respect. Once, he threw a glass at the wall beside my head. The shards caught the light like tiny stars before cutting into my arm. He said it was my fault for flinching. My mother came home, saw the blood, and said, "Don't make him feel bad about it." That was the rhythm of our house violence followed by silence. Silence followed by excuses. It was like living inside a sermon where every verse ended with my guilt. I learned to measure footsteps, to listen for the clink of ice in a glass, to time my breaths between his moods. But what I could never silence was the sound of my mother's laughter whenever he mocked me. It was small, brittle, and it broke me more than his fists ever did. At 21, I tried to leave. I packed a duffel bag, waited until dawn, and slipped down the stairs. The front door creaked. Before I could open it, his voice came from the living room. "Where you going, little poet?" He stepped out of the shadows holding my scholarship envelope. He'd found it. He tore it in half, then in quarters, the paper falling like snow between us. My mother appeared behind him, her face pale. I thought she might stop him. Instead, she said, "You'll thank him one day. The world is cruel, and he's teaching you to survive it." That night, he took my phone and my ID. I wasn't allowed to leave the house for a week. When he finally gave the phone back, all my messages were deleted, my contacts gone. He said, "No one needs to talk to you, but family." My mother nodded. That was when I understood I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was her peace offering. The thing she fed to his anger so she wouldn't have to face it herself. By 25, I was a ghost in my own home. I worked part-time cleaning offices, handing my paycheck over to him. I kept a second phone hidden in a drawer, a secret number only one person had. Alex, a friend from college who'd once told me, "You have a voice people should hear." I hadn't believed him then. But some nights when Ray's footsteps echoed down the hall and my mother's voice trailed behind him like smoke, I'd read old messages from Alex just to remember that outside these walls there was a world that didn't revolve around fear. Still leaving wasn't simple. He had the mortgage in his name. He controlled the accounts. My mother watched everything I did, her eyes soft but sharp, as if pity and suspicion were the same emotion. The day she caught me hiding $20 in a book, she slapped me so hard my vision blurred. "Don't you dare make him think I can't control you," she hissed. "Do you understand? I did." She wasn't protecting him anymore. She was protecting the lie that she was a good wife. Looking back now, lying in this hospital bed, I realize every act of cruelty had a rehearsal. Every bruise was a practice run for the night he finally decided to finish it. The night his boot found my ribs again and again while my mother stood in the doorway and smiled like she'd won something. But what he didn't know, what she didn't see, was that before the last blow fell, I had already started recording everything. Every insult, every threat, every laugh that followed pain. Somewhere in my room beneath the floorboard where the dust gathers my phone still waits. Proof that I existed. Proof that their silence won't bury me this time. The night it finally happened started quietly the way storms sometimes begin with still air. It was late August and the heat hung heavy over Ohio, thick enough to taste. The house smelled of fried onions and bourbon, that combination I'd come to associate with danger. My mother hummed in the kitchen as she scrubbed dishes that were already clean. Ray sat at the table, his boots up, watching the news, with the volume too loud, waiting for a reason to explode. I'd just finished my shift at the office cleaning company and came home with my first full paycheck in months, $480. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I slipped the envelope into my purse and thought I could hide it long enough to open a separate account. I should have known better. He spotted the edge of the envelope before I could even take off my shoes. "What's that?" His voice was low, lazy, but the kind of lazy that meant danger. "My pay," I said carefully. "I'm saving for what he cut in. For a life that doesn't include us." My mother turned off the faucet. The dripping of the tap became the only sound in the room. "It's my paycheck," I said again. "I earned it." He laughed, but it wasn't humor, it was ownership. "You think anything in this house belongs to you? The roof over your head, the air you breathe, that's mine. You live here because I allow it." He reached out, snatched the envelope, and tore it open. Bills spilled out like feathers. "You should be thanking me," he said. "You wouldn't last a week without me." "I would," I said, voice shaking, but steady. "I would last a lifetime." That was the first spark. He rose from the chair in one fluid motion. "You ungrateful little bitch," he hissed, and his hand came down hard across my face. The slap snapped my head sideways, and the taste of metal filled my mouth. My mother gasped, but not for me. "Ray." "Stop," she said too softly. Then she looked at me and whispered, "Apologize." "For what?" My voice cracked. "For breathing." He struck me again this time with his fist. The world tilted. I fell against the counter, pain blooming like heat through my ribs. My mother's voice came again sharper now. "Lauren, just say you're sorry. No." The word was small but final. I saw her eyes go cold. She stepped forward, grabbed my arm, and hissed, "Don't you see what you're doing to him?" That was the moment I understood there would be no rescue. Not from her, not from anyone in this house. Ray grabbed me by the hair, dragging me toward the dining room. I clawed at his wrist, but his grip tightened. "You need to learn your place," he said. My mother followed silent now, her face blank. The belt hung over the back of the chair where he'd left it earlier. When he reached for it, something in me broke, not just fear, but the quiet I had lived under for years. "Don't," I said, but my voice barely carried. He swung anyway. The first strike landed across my shoulder, the leather snapping through the air with that sickening sound I'd heard in my nightmares. I stumbled back, tripped on the rug, hit the floor hard. He didn't stop. The second blow hit my ribs, the third, my arm. Pain turned to static. My breath came short, ragged, my vision blurring at the edges. "You'll learn respect if it kills you," he shouted. My mother stood in the doorway, eyes shining with something like satisfaction. "She brings this on herself," she said quietly. "She always does." I tried to crawl away, but he kicked me hard in the side. The sound left my throat before I could stop it. Somewhere inside that scream, I felt my heartbeat stutter sharp and wrong. The world swam. "Ray." "She's bleeding," my mother said at last, but her voice wasn't alarmed. It was annoyed. "Good," he muttered. "Maybe she'll remember this next time." He kicked me again. I felt something give under the impact. Maybe bone, maybe will. The pain was distant now, floating unreal. I heard her laugh, soft, brittle, and I thought, this is how it ends. Then something inside me whispered no. I don't know how I managed it, but I reached for the corner of the counter, pulling myself upright just enough to meet his eyes. "You can't erase me," I rasped. "Not anymore." He hesitated for a second, thrown off by the defiance, then swung again. That last kick sent me down for good. The tiles were cool against my cheek. My mother's bare feet stepped into view. Her toenails were painted red. She crouched beside me, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, "You'll ruin everything if you keep this up." Then she smiled the same smile she'd worn for him. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was that smile. When I woke again, I was here under white lights that hummed and machines that counted my pulse. Alive, but barely. I don't know how long I drifted between consciousness and the void, but when I heard the doctor say, "She might not survive the night," something in me refused. I remembered the phone hidden under my floorboard, the recordings stored on its memory card, and the small folder labeled "For the Police." I had prepared for this, somehow knowing it would come. Now lying in this sterile room, I realized survival isn't the victory, it's the weapon. They thought they could bury me in silence again, but they don't know that silence has teeth, and this time it's mine. The next morning, the hospital room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A nurse named Sandra adjusted my IV line with gentle precision, her eyes avoiding mine. She'd seen too many faces like mine, swollen-stitched, covered in bruises that told stories nobody wanted to say out loud. "How are you feeling, Lauren?" she asked softly. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Like I lost a war." She paused, then said something that stayed with me. "Sometimes surviving is winning." She slipped a small card into my hand when she thought no one was watching. "If you ever want this on record," she murmured, "call this number. Domestic Victim Response Unit." Her voice was quiet, but her eyes were firm. That single moment felt like oxygen after years of drowning. Mom arrived an hour later wearing her Sunday dress pearls and that perfect lipstick shade she saved for public appearances. To anyone else, she looked like a woman grieving a tragedy that had happened to her. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, stepping inside. Her voice dripped with false concern. "You gave us such a scare." I stared at her. "Us," I croaked. "You mean him." Her smile didn't falter. "Ray didn't mean it. He was upset. You know how you provoke him." She said it like she was discussing weather, not attempted murder. The room tilted. I pressed my palm against the blanket just to stay grounded. The doctor said I could have died, I whispered. She waved it away with a manicured hand. You're young, you'll heal, but you need to stop exaggerating when people ask what happened. You tripped, do you understand the police might come by? When she leaned closer, her perfume lilac and guilt filled my lungs. Don't ruin this family over your dramatics, she hissed. My pulse spiked on the monitor. The beeping drew Sandra back into the room. Everything okay here? The nurse asked, voice calm but sharp. Mom straightened instantly, switching back to her performance mode. Oh yes, thank you. My daughter just gets emotional. Sandra's eyes flicked to me, and for a heartbeat I thought about screaming the truth. But the words stuck in my throat. Mom placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch soft enough for the nurse to miss the warning beneath it. Rest, she said sweetly. I'll talk to Ray about keeping his temper. Then she left her heels clicking like punctuation marks down the sterile hallway. That afternoon, a detective returned. Lauren, he began. Your mother says you fell down the stairs. Does that sound right? His tone was neutral, but his eyes, sharp-searching, told me he didn't buy it. I hesitated. Fear tasted metallic again, bitter as blood. Yes, I said finally. It was the stairs. He closed his notebook slowly. Okay, he said, but his gaze lingered. If you remember anything different, you can call me. Anytime. He placed his card on the bedside table beside the nurse's. After he left, I lay in silence. My chest burned with shame. Every lie I told was another favor to the people who'd tried to kill me. But I wasn't ready yet. When evening came, Sandra stopped by once more, checking my vitals. You don't have to protect them, she said softly without looking at me. Tears blurred my vision. If I speak, he'll come for me again, I whispered. She met my eyes finally. If you stay silent, he already has. Then she tucked the blanket around me and left. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I replayed every moment, the kick, the laughter, the way my mother's eyes had gleamed. The pain in my ribs pulsed with each breath, but the humiliation hurt more. I turned my face toward the small window. The sky outside was a deep, endless blue, and I realized that if I made it out of this hospital, I would never return to that house again. Before dawn, I asked the nurse for my personal belongings. She hesitated, but handed me the clear plastic bag, my torn shirt, my purse, my phone cracked but still functional. My hands shook as I held it. There were missed calls from home, all from my mother's number. I deleted them. Then I opened my Notes app. I had to know if my recordings were still backed up to the cloud. They were. I pressed play on the most recent one. Ray's voice boomed through the tiny speaker, even at low volume. You'll learn respect if it kills you. Then my mother's voice followed, calm and chilling. She brings this on herself. Hearing it sent a shiver down my spine. I stopped the playback before the sound of impact began. That was my proof, the truth they thought they could bury under fear. When Sandra came in for the morning shift, I met her eyes. I'm ready to call that number, I said. Her shoulders softened. Good, she replied. You just saved your own life. Within the hour, 2 representatives from the Domestic Victim Response Unit arrived. They took my statement carefully, documenting every injury, every date, every detail. I gave them permission to access my phone recordings. Their faces hardened as they listened. One of them, a woman named Officer Reyes, squeezed my hand and said, You're not going back there. Not ever. By the next day, a protective order was in motion. I was moved to a secure shelter under police watch. My mother tried to call me dozens of times. When she couldn't reach me, she left a voicemail that sounded rehearsed. Lauren, stop this nonsense. You're ruining everything. People are starting to ask questions. Her voice cracked only once when she said the word people. Not out of love, but out of fear of exposure. That was the moment I stopped mourning her. At the shelter, I met women who carried similar scars, some visible, some hidden. We shared stories in hushed tones over weak coffee and sleepless nights. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my pain. One woman, Marisol, told me, they control us until we give the truth a voice. Then it's their turn to fear. Her words became my compass. A week later, I sat in the police station handing over the flash drive with all my recordings. There's more under the floorboard, I said quietly. Under the vent in my room. Officer Reyes nodded. We'll get it. When she left, I looked out the window at the morning traffic, the ordinary hum of life continuing. I realized the same street where I used to count cars while waiting for his drunken rants to end was still there, but I wasn't that girl anymore. I had turned silence into evidence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. A week after I handed over the recordings, I was moved into a temporary safe apartment managed by the Victim Support Program. The first few nights were silent in a different way. No shouting, no footsteps, no glass breaking. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Freedom. I learned could feel just as disorienting as fear. My body healed faster than my mind. The bruises faded, but the echoes stayed. I flinched when doors closed too hard. I woke up at 3 a.m. expecting his voice. Then one morning, Officer Reyes called. "Lauren," she said, "we have your mother and Ray in custody. We recovered the devices from your home. There's enough to proceed with charges." Her tone was professional, but beneath it, I heard satisfaction, the kind that comes from seeing a monster finally caught. Later that day, I sat in the police station to give a full statement. The evidence table was covered in printed photos, my bruises broken glass, the belt still stained at the edges. My old phone lay there, too, labeled Exhibit A. The sound tech played one of the recordings. Ray's voice filled the room again. "You'll learn respect if it kills you." Then the slap, the crash, my mother's laughter. Everyone in that room froze. Reyes pressed stop and said quietly, "That's enough." She looked at me. "We'll make sure he never touches you again." As I left the station, the weight that had sat on my shoulders for 15 years began to lift. Not gone, but lighter. Outside, the sun hit my skin in a way that felt unfamiliar, like I'd forgotten what warmth without threat felt like. A few days later, I met Mrs. Howard again, the neighbor who'd called the cops the night I was taken to the hospital. She was sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, wearing her usual floral blouse. "You look better," she said. "I'm alive," I replied. "That's a start." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me she'd heard the shouting that night louder than ever, and when it went silent too suddenly, she knew something was wrong. "I wasn't sure if I should call," she admitted, voice trembling. "But then I saw your mother standing at the window smiling. I knew I had to." Those words sent a chill through me. Even from outside, that smile had looked wrong. When she testified later, she described it in front of the jury. It wasn't fear on that woman's face. It was satisfaction. The courtroom went quiet. Even the judge shifted in his seat. Ray's lawyer tried to argue I'd provoked him, that the recordings were out of context, but the prosecution played one clip where my mother said clear as glass, "She needs to learn respect." The jurors winced. I sat behind my attorney, hands folded in my lap, every nerve screaming to run. But I stayed. I made myself look at them, both of them. Ray sat there, jaw-clenched, eyes full of hatred, but also confusion, as though he couldn't understand why the world no longer obeyed him. My mother, sitting beside him, looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pinned neatly but trembling hands betraying her calm facade. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, my voice shook but didn't break. For years, I said they told me silence was safety, that if I stayed quiet, things would get better. But silence is what let this grow. I have the scars to prove it. He didn't just break my ribs, he broke the part of me that thought love meant obedience. And she taught me to accept it. I glanced at my mother. Her eyes filled with tears, but I saw no remorse, only fear of what people would think. I continued. But I learned something. Truth doesn't die, even when you try to bury it under bruises. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Ray Collins, attempted murder, aggravated assault, coercive control, sentenced to 18 years. Evelyn Mitchell, my mother, convicted of aiding and abetting and obstruction, 7 years. When the gavel struck, it sounded like a door closing on a haunted house. As the officers led them away, my mother turned once. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Then I remembered the smile and the pity evaporated. After the trial, Mrs. Howard hugged me outside the courthouse. "You did it," she said. "No," I answered quietly. "We did. You made the call." She smiled through tears. "Sometimes justice starts with one person refusing to look away." I moved back into my apartment a few weeks later with the help of the Victim Support Program. The first night I slept there, I left all the lights on. Not because I was afraid, but because I could. because light was mine again. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. It contained a statement from the judge's closing remarks. This court acknowledges the extraordinary courage of the victim who not only survived but ensured that truth prevailed. Let this case remind us that silence enables cruelty and that speaking up can save lives. I framed that letter and hung it above my desk. It wasn't just justice, it was proof that my story mattered. Months passed. I started therapy, wrote daily, and began volunteering at a shelter for women leaving abusive homes. Some nights I'd read their faces and see my own reflection years ago, tired, frightened, still hopeful beneath the fear. I'd tell them, "You're not crazy and you're not weak. You're surviving something you should never have had to survive." One evening as I left the shelter, the sunset painted the sky gold and crimson. The wind carried the faint scent of lilac, the perfume my mother used to wear, and for a heartbeat I froze. Then I exhaled. It no longer smelled like her. It smelled like freedom. 6 months after the trial, I finally stopped checking the locks twice before bed. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom on the second floor, with peeling paint and a view of the grocery store parking lot, but it was mine. My name on the lease, my key on the hook. Every time I turned the lock, I felt a little piece of control return. The first few weeks, I barely spoke. I wrote instead, pages filled with fragments, memories, questions, pieces of a life I was still trying to understand. Writing had once been what got me punished. Now, it was what saved me. The Victim Support Program helped me apply for financial assistance. I got a job at a nonprofit that worked with survivors of domestic violence. I started by organizing files and answering phones, but soon they asked me to write. Blog posts, newsletters, public statements. "You have a way of putting feelings into words," my supervisor Denise told me. "People listen when it's real." That's how my story began to spread. Quietly at first, just words on a screen, no name attached, but the responses came quickly. Hundreds of women wrote things like, "That's my story too, and I thought I was the only one." I realized I wasn't just surviving, I was building something, a space for the voices that had been drowned out by fists and fear. In March, I received a letter from the Ohio Victim Advocacy Conference. They wanted me to speak. "Tell your story," the email read. "People need to hear from someone who turned evidence into change." The thought made my stomach twist. For years, I had been silenced. The idea of standing on a stage and talking about it made my hands shake. But I said yes. The day of the event, I stood backstage with my notes trembling in my hands. The audience beyond the curtain buzzed with low conversation lawyers, social workers, survivors, even police officers. When my name was announced, I walked to the podium. The lights were blinding the air, heavy with expectation. I used to think silence was safety. I began, my voice low but steady. That if I stayed quiet, I could keep the peace. But silence doesn't protect you. It protects the person hurting you. The room went still. I told them about the years of control, about my mother's complicity, about the belt, the boots, the laughter. I saw people wipe their eyes. Then I spoke about the recordings. I didn't have power, but I had proof. And proof doesn't blink. Proof doesn't lie. By the time I finished, there was no applause. Just the kind of silence that means people are listening with their hearts. Then slowly they stood. The sound of their clapping filled the room like a heartbeat. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like suffocation. It felt like respect. After the speech, a woman approached me. She was in her 60s with tired eyes and a gentle smile. "My daughter went through something similar," she said quietly. "I never believed her. I see now what that must have done. I'm sorry." Her words broke something open in me. I hugged her, and for a moment, I felt what forgiveness could be, not for my mother, but for the part of me that had once needed her to be different. That night, I returned home and sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. The air was cool, the city lights flickering below. I thought about the house on Maplewood Street. The windows were probably dark now. The walls might still echo with the ghosts of our voices. I didn't want to go back there, not ever. But part of me hoped the neighbors who used to look away would remember what happened and think twice. Next time they heard shouting through the walls. A month later, I received an envelope from the Department of Corrections. Inside was a form stating that Ray Collins had been transferred to a maximum security facility after an altercation with another inmate. I folded the letter neatly and filed it away. It didn't bring me joy, Justice wasn't joy, it was simply balance restored. As for my mother, she wrote once, a short letter from the women's prison in Cleveland. Lauren, it began. I hope you're healing. I pray for forgiveness. I only did what I thought was right to keep peace in the house. I read it twice, then set it on fire in the kitchen sink. Watching the flames curl the paper into ash felt cleaner than any answer I could give. By summer, my blog had grown into something bigger, a platform called Unbroken Words, where survivors could share their stories anonymously. We built a community that stretched across states. There were nights when I read messages from women who said I left today because of what you wrote. And I realized that every scar, every night of terror had turned into a map leading someone else out of their own darkness. One evening, I was closing my laptop when I heard a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Howard holding a small box. I was cleaning out my attic, she said, and found something I thought you might want. Inside was a photo our old street before it became haunted. The porch swing, the maple tree me at 16, sitting on the steps with a book in my lap. You were always reading, she said, smiling softly. I used to think you'd get out of that house one day. I'm glad you did. I looked at the photo, and for the first time, I didn't see a trapped girl. I saw a survivor in the making. As the months turned to a year, I learned that healing isn't a straight line. Some days I still woke to phantom sounds, boots on linoleum, laughter in the dark. But I also woke to the smell of coffee, the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and strong. And that was enough. One night, I returned to the courthouse to attend a new case as an observer. Another young woman stood trembling at the witness stand, her story eerily familiar. Afterward, she found me in the hallway. You're Lauren Mitchell, she said. I read your blog. You made me believe I could do this. I smiled. You already did. When I stepped outside, the sky was bruised purple with evening. The courthouse steps were cool beneath my hands. I looked up at the stone building, the flag stirring gently in the wind, and thought of something Officer Reyes had told me: justice isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the truth. As I walked away, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting circles of gold along the sidewalk. I remembered the night I lay on that kitchen floor believing I wouldn't see morning. Now every light felt like proof that I had made it. I paused at the corner, took a deep breath, and whispered to the quiet air, You can't erase me. Then I smiled, not the smile of survival, but of ownership, of a life rebuilt word by word, truth by truth. And somewhere far away in a prison cell, I hoped the silence finally belonged to him. A year later, I still kept the photo Mrs. Howard had given me on my desk. It reminded me that the girl in the picture, the one with the hollow eyes and hidden hope, had made it out. Life had steadied into something almost ordinary. I worked full-time at the nonprofit, now managing survivor outreach programs. My writing turned into workshops, my story into a blueprint for others learning to rebuild. But healing, I discovered, is not the absence of pain. It's learning how to live with its shadow. Some mornings, I'd wake from dreams of boots and laughter, and for a split second, the old house came back to life. Then I'd open my eyes, see sunlight through my curtains, and remember, I am here. I am safe. One afternoon, the district attorney called. We're reopening several old cases, she said. Your recordings helped us uncover a network of complaints against other women he hurt before you. My stomach twisted, but not with fear. You're saying there were more? I asked quietly. Yes. But thanks to you, they finally spoke. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every bruise, every scar, they had become evidence not just for me, but for others. For years, I thought my suffering had no purpose, but maybe the purpose was this proof that truth once spoken keeps echoing. 2 weeks later, I was asked to attend a press briefing. The prosecutor thanked one brave woman whose documentation inspired a cascade of justice. They didn't name me, but I stood in the back unseen and smiled. It was enough. Afterward, I walked through downtown Columbus. The autumn wind carried the smell of roasted nuts and asphalt, the sound of traffic merging with laughter from a nearby cafe. I used to walk streets like this in silence, eyes down waiting for trouble. Now I looked up. I met people's eyes. I existed in full color. That evening, I visited Evelyn, my mother, for the last time. Her parole hearing was approaching, and the advocate's office asked if I wanted to provide a statement. I said yes. The prison visitation room smelled like bleach and stale air. When she walked in, she looked smaller hair streaked with gray, her posture finally bent by something heavier than pride. Lauren, she said softly, you look strong. I am, I answered. She folded her hands. I pray for you every night. I never meant for it to go so far. I leaned forward. You didn't mean for him to almost kill me, or you didn't mean for people to find out. Her eyes filled, but the tears looked rehearsed. I was afraid. So was I said. But fear isn't an excuse for cruelty. We sat in silence. Behind us, a guard coughed. She reached across the table, fingers trembling. Can you ever forgive me? I thought of all the years I'd spent craving that sentence. Now it landed like dust. Forgiveness isn't something I owe you, I said. It's something I give to myself so you can't own one more piece of me. She lowered her gaze. Then I suppose that's my punishment. I stood. No. Prison is your punishment. Living with what you did is mine. But at least one of us will turn it into something good. When I left, I didn't look back. The next morning, I wrote an essay titled The Weight of Silence and published it under my own name for the first time. It went viral within days, shared by advocacy groups, journalists, and survivors who said it made them feel seen. My inbox flooded with letters, women, men, even children of victims thanking me for naming what they could not. One line appeared again and again. You made me believe I wasn't crazy. Months later, I received an invitation to testify before the state legislature about strengthening coercive control laws. I agreed. Standing before lawmakers in suits and cameras flashing, I told them about the girl who'd once thought love was obedience, and the woman who'd learned that obedience was just another word for fear. When the bill passed unanimously, I walked out of the chamber into a cold December afternoon snow beginning to fall in soft, hesitant flakes. At home, I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city glowed under holiday lights. Inside, the silence was warm, not dangerous. I opened my notebook and wrote a final line at the bottom of the page. They broke my bones, but not my voice, and that's what saved me. The wind rattled the window pane, and for a moment, I imagined it carrying those words to every woman still trapped behind a locked door, every child listening to footsteps down the hall. Sometimes people ask if I hate my mother. I tell them hate is too small for what she did. What I feel is colder, quieter, a refusal. I refuse to let her version of me exist. I refuse to carry her guilt. I refuse to forget, but I also refuse to be defined by it. As night fell, I turned off the lights and stepped onto my balcony. The air was sharp, the stars barely visible through the city glow. Somewhere a siren wailed, then faded. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold until it stung. Justice. I've learned isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or revenge. It comes quietly in the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that no one could stop. In the sound of keys turning in your own lock. In the stillness that doesn't hurt anymore. When I went back inside, I left the door unlocked for a moment, just to prove to myself I could. Then I smiled, whispered the same words that started everything my silent promise to the girl who survived. You can't erase me. And for the first time, the silence answered back not with fear, but with peace. 2 years later, the scar along my ribs had faded to a pale line, but I still traced it sometimes when I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just skin, it was a sentence carved into memory: you lived. The nonprofit had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Unbroken Words wasn't just a blog anymore, it was a national network of survivor storytellers. We hosted workshops, funded safe houses, and trained police officers on trauma literacy. Every month, I received a stack of handwritten letters from across the country, Kentucky, Arizona, Maine, each beginning the same way: Dear Lauren, I never told anyone before now. One day, I received an invitation from Ohio State University to give a guest lecture titled The Psychology of Control: How Silence Enables Abuse. I almost declined. Returning to the same campus that had once sent me that scholarship offer the one Ray tore to pieces felt like tempting ghosts. But something in me needed to go back, not to reclaim the past, but to rewrite it. When I stepped onto that stage, the lecture hall was full. Students, faculty, even a few officers from the local precinct sat waiting. I began with the truth I once tried to bury. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I used to believe my pain was private. It wasn't. It was inherited. It was taught. It was enforced. I told them about fear disguised as family, about how gaslighting erases your reflection until you forget what you look like without permission. Then I told them about evidence about the night I hit record, not because I thought it would save me, but because I needed proof that I wasn't crazy. When I played a short clip from my old recording, the room fell silent. Ray's voice filled the air one last time. "You'll learn respect if it kills you." Then I pressed pause. "It didn't," I said simply. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was steady like rain on glass. After the lecture, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20. "My boyfriend yells at me the way he used to yell at you," she whispered. "But he never hits me, so I keep telling myself it's not abuse." I looked her in the eye. "If you're afraid to speak, it's already abuse," I said. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and I handed her my card. "When you're ready, call. We'll help you leave." That night, back in my apartment, I poured a glass of water, opened the window, and watched the city breathe below. I thought of every person still trapped in a house where footsteps meant fear, and I wished I could tell them all. You are not the crazy one. You are the proof that truth can survive violence. Later, I received word that my mother had been denied parole. The board cited lack of accountability. Reading that phrase brought a strange calm. For so long, I'd chased closure like it was something to find. But closure, I learned, isn't a door that shuts. It's a window you open and finally breathe through. A few months after the lecture, I visited the cemetery on Maplewood Street. I stood near the plot where Ray's first wife, Denise, was buried. Her headstone was Simple Beloved Mother. 1971-24. I knelt brushing away leaves and whispered, "They finally said your name in court." A breeze swept through the trees, scattering yellow leaves across the grass. I took it as a thank you. On my way home, I stopped in front of the old house. It was boarded up now, the porch swing gone, the windows clouded with dust. For years, I'd imagined burning it down, but standing there, I realized it didn't deserve even that much passion. It was just wood and memory. The real fire had already done its work inside me. I left a small white flower on the step, not for them, but for the girl who used to live there. Then I turned and walked away, never once looking back. By the 3rd year, I had written a memoir. I titled it Proof Doesn't Blink. When it was published, it reached people far beyond what I could have dreamed. Book clubs discussed it, survivors carried it into courtrooms, and counselors used it in recovery groups. One reviewer wrote, "This isn't a revenge story, it's a resurrection." I liked that. The night the book launched, I stood in front of a small crowd at an indie bookstore in Cleveland. Cameras flashed pens, scratched against books, but the moment that mattered most came when a woman in her 60s took my hand and said, "I left my husband last week. Your story gave me the courage." I squeezed her hand and said, "Then you're the story now." When I drove home that night, the highway was quiet moonlight streaking across the windshield. For the first time in my life, silence wasn't dangerous, it was sacred. At home, I placed a copy of my book on the shelf next to the framed letter from the judge. Beneath it, I taped a small note I'd written to myself, "You are not what they did to you." Before bed, I turned on the porch light, the same ritual every night. To anyone passing by, it looked ordinary, but for me, it was a signal, a beacon. It said, "There is light where there once was screaming." As I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. A message from Officer Reyes. "Your testimony helped pass the National Coercive Control Act today. You did it." I smiled into the darkness. "No," I whispered. "We did." Outside, the night was still. The world kept turning cars, passing lives unfolding. Somewhere, someone was gathering the courage to pack a bag, to open a hidden phone, to call for help. Somewhere, another story was beginning. I closed my eyes and saw the girl on the kitchen floor, bleeding and broken, whispering through the pain, "You can't erase me." She was right, they didn't. And they never will. It's been 5 years now. I still wake before dawn, not from nightmares anymore, but from habit, the body remembering what the heart has finally forgotten. The city is quiet at that hour, the streets wet with early rain, and the sky a pale shade of forgiveness. I make coffee, sit by the window, and watch the world rebuild itself in light. My life looks simple from the outside. I teach 2 writing workshops a week, manage Unbroken Words, and volunteer at a shelter every Thursday night. But underneath that rhythm, something more deliberate has taken shape, a kind of mission I never planned but can't walk away from. I help others tell their stories. Not as confessions, but as declarations. I existed, I endured, I am still here, I am still. Every month, I host a circle called The Quiet Ones. It's for survivors who aren't ready to speak publicly, who just need someone to listen without judgment. We meet in a community room at the library, the air smelling faintly of old paper and hope. The first time, only 3 people came. Now we fill every chair. At the start of each meeting, I light a single white candle, not for mourning, but for memory. I tell them, this isn't a support group, it's a testimony rehearsal. Then we sit, and one by one they begin. There's Jenna, who escaped a marriage where love meant bruises hidden under sweaters. Marcus, who hasn't told his sons that their mother once tried to drown him in silence. Teresa, who whispers her story like a prayer. They talk, they cry, they heal, and every time I hear the words "me too," spoken in a new voice, I know the darkness is shrinking. One night after the meeting, a teenager named Lily stayed behind. She'd barely spoken for weeks, but that night she said, "My mom's still with him. I record everything like you did. I'm waiting for the right time." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. I gave her my number. When that time comes, I said, "Call me first." 2 months later, she did. Her evidence led to an arrest that made local news. She's in college now studying law. When she writes to me, she always signs "your shadow student." Sometimes when I think of my mother, I wonder if she ever sits in a circle like this somewhere in a prison group pretending to listen while rehearsing excuses. But that thought doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a passing wind in a house I've already left behind. I keep her photo tucked away in a box under my bed. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder evil doesn't always snarl. Sometimes it smiles in pearls and perfume. This past spring, I was invited to Washington, D.C. to accept an award for advocacy journalism. The ceremony was held in a marble hall filled with chandeliers and polished shoes. When my name was called, I walked to the podium in a navy suit the same color as the one I wore the night I testified. The applause was polite professional, but when I began to speak, the room changed. "I am not a writer because of what happened to me," I said. "I am a writer because they tried to erase me, and words became my way of existing." Then I read a line from my book, "Silence was their language. Truth became mine." Afterward, an older man in a gray suit approached me. "My daughter loved your book," he said. "She read it in recovery. She's alive because of it." For a moment, the years collapsed, the hospital lights, the belt, the laughter, the courtroom, and all I could think was, this is what surviving is for. Later that night, I walked along the Potomac River. The air was warm, the water glimmering with city reflections. Somewhere across that dark surface, I imagined the woman I used to be standing on the opposite bank still trying to cross. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she'd make it, that someday she'd walk without fear. The following winter, Unbroken Words opened its first physical center in Cleveland, a space for free counseling, legal aid, and creative workshops. On opening day, I hung a framed quote near the door. It read, "Evidence never blinks." It wasn't about proof anymore, it was about visibility, about teaching others to see themselves clearly even when no one else does. As I walked through the rooms, sunlight spilled across the floorboards. The walls were lined with faces of survivors who'd rebuilt their lives. None of them were victims anymore. They were authors, advocates, artists, mothers, fathers, people who had turned pain into legacy. I stood in the doorway overwhelmed. Denise, my mentor from the nonprofit, touched my shoulder. "You did this," she said. "No," I told her. "We did." Every voice that refused to stay silent built this place. That evening, when everyone left, I sat alone in the main room. The air still carried echoes of laughter of stories that used to tremble but now rang steady. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in a hush that no longer felt threatening. I lit one last candle before I left. Its flame flickered gently against the glass, steady and alive. I whispered the words that began it all, the same vow I'd made to the girl who survived and to the woman who rose. "You can't erase me." Then I smiled, turned off the lights, and walked out into the snow. The cold kissed my face. The city lights blurred through the flakes, and for the first time I realized I no longer needed to look back to know where I came from, because I'd already rewritten it. And somewhere in that rewritten silence there was peace and 1,000 other voices still rising. 5 years after the night that almost ended me, I stood outside the courthouse again, but this time not as a victim. I was there as a mentor for someone else. Lily, the girl who once whispered her story in our support circle, was about to testify in her own case. She looked at me with the same trembling hands I once had and said, "What if I freeze?" I smiled. "Then you breathe. And if you forget what to say, just tell the truth. It's stronger than any lie." When she took the stand, I watched her voice tremble, then steady. She didn't break. When the verdict came back guilty, She turned toward me and mouthed, "Thank you." I shook my head. "You did this." Walking out of that courtroom, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows the same way it had years ago when I walked out alone. But now it didn't feel like escape, it felt like arrival. Outside, reporters swarmed asking Lily for comment. I stayed in the background, content to let her story take the light. I'd had my day. This was hers. As I walked to my car, I noticed a familiar face in the distance. Officer Reyes. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her posture was the same solid, unwavering. She waved me over. "You keep finding your way back here," she said with a grin. "Guess justice is addictive," I replied. She chuckled, then her tone softened. "You know, when I first met you, you could barely speak. Now you're changing laws." I shrugged. "I just told the truth." Reyes nodded. "That's what most people never do." That night, I drove to the lake just outside Cleveland, the same place I'd gone after every major turning point in my life. The water was calm, the moonlight silvering its surface. I stood at the edge and tossed a pebble into the ripples. Watching them widen, I thought about how pain works the same way, spreading outward until it touches everything. But so does courage. Sometimes I still hear echoes of that old house in dreams, the sound of boots, the crack of laughter, but now they fade before they reach me. They're ghosts without power. My reality is different. My silence has transformed into testimony, my fear into legacy. The next morning, I received an email from the governor's office. The Lauren Mitchell Survivor Advocacy Act had officially passed statewide. It mandated that every domestic abuse investigation include a trauma-informed response team. I sat at my kitchen table reading it twice before it sank in. My name was in law. I cried not because of pride, but because of what it meant that no one else would have to prove they were telling the truth while bleeding. Later that week, the local paper published a story titled "The Woman Who Taught Silence to Speak." They asked for a quote. I wrote, "I didn't teach silence to speak, I just stopped letting it define me." That evening, I returned to the center. The building glowed under the streetlights, its windows warm and alive with the sound of laughter from inside. New faces had joined since I'd last been there. Different stories, same strength. Inside, Lily was leading the group. She stood where I once stood, lighting the candle, her voice steady. "We light this," she said, not to remember the pain, but to remember that we survived it. I stood quietly in the doorway, unseen, and listened. Every word she said carried a piece of what I'd once thought I'd lost forever. My voice multiplied. When the meeting ended, she spotted me. "Stay for tea?" she asked. I nodded. We sat by the window, steam rising between us, the world outside blurred by rain. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," she said. "Now I think it means remembering without breaking." I smiled. "Exactly." Before leaving, I walked through the empty halls one last time. The walls were lined with framed photos and quotes from survivors. At the end of the hall was one I hadn't seen before. Lily had added it. They tried to silence her, but she taught the silence to listen. LM. I traced the letters with my fingers. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just breathed. That night, I drove home through the rain headlights, slicing through the darkness. The road shimmered like glass. When I reached my apartment, I paused at the door hand on the knob, remembering every other door I'd stood behind, waiting for permission to exist. Then I laughed softly and opened it myself. Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon and lavender, the scent I'd chosen to replace my mother's lilac perfume. I poured tea, turned on the radio, and listened to the sound of my own quiet life. In the corner sat the old recorder, the one I used that night. I hadn't touched it in years. I picked it up, turned it on, and pressed play. The device clicked, but instead of Ray's voice, I heard my own. I'd forgotten I'd left a new recording years ago, a message to myself. "If you're hearing this, it means you made it," my younger voice said. "You're free. Don't forget the girl who got you here." I smiled through tears, then turned it off. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake. I stepped onto the balcony, the wind cold and clean. The city stretched below me. Lights, streets, lives all moving forward. I closed my eyes and whispered not to the ghosts, but to the night itself. I made it. And somewhere between the thunder and the silence, I swore I heard an echo, soft, certain, eternal answer back. "You can't erase me." That's how the story ends. Not with vengeance, not even with victory, but with proof that survival is a kind of art, the kind you keep creating long after the bruises fade, until the silence itself learns to speak your name with respect.